I'm going to pass over now to Genevieve. Thank you so much. Over to you, Genevieve.
So first, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. I have a few projects going on at the moment. The first one is Women's Voices, which is a podcast that I do featuring interviews with women's rights activists. And sometimes I do readings from books or texts, excerpts or articles. And then also news discussion. I also have co-founded a website with Anna Slatz called Reduxx. We just got up and running at the beginning of February, and we're putting out articles related to gender ideology news on that topic. And then I have my own personal Substack where I kind of put things that don't really fit into the category of where I would publish otherwise. So things related to certain feminist topics globally, or just something that's been on my mind. Okay, so today, actually, I want to talk about the origins of the trans flag, because I recently read the memoir of the man who designed the trans flag. And then I'm going to kind of explore a little bit more about some of the history of organizing that was going on around the time period of the 60s to the 80s, 90s. And then I'm going to see how that fits into kind of today's queer theory context a little bit. So the man who designed the trans flag identifies as a lesbian and has written forced feminization content, including a story about marrying a young teen girl who does not age. For those who don't know, forced feminization is a porn genre that ostensibly the men are forced to wear women's clothing and pretend to be a woman. It's a whole genre with many other subgenres under it. And so when I say that he's written forced feminization content, I mean that he has certain themes, which I will be showing you from his books. The designer of the trans flag goes by the name Monica Helms. His birth name is Robert Hogg. And he's a veteran of the US Navy. He's from Arizona in the United States, and he's served on 2 submarines. He began cross-dressing on a regular basis after visiting a drag bar while he was stationed in San Diego in 1978. So just to tell you a little bit briefly, I'm sure that we're all aware of how popular the trans flag has become now. Since its creation in 1999. Hard to believe it's only been a couple of decades, but it's been flown at government institutions, at universities, top universities as well. In the US, at least, I'm aware that it has been flown at elementary schools and preschools. It's featured widely on clothing designs, including clothing designs for children. It's got its own emoji that was fairly recent within the past few years, and it's even, as of the beginning of this year, been placed on the highest peak in Antarctica. This other photo is a picture of the flag being flown outside of MI6. So one of the very first things that he says in his book, in his memoir, More Than Just a Flag, is this strange assertion that he doesn't actually have a gender. So he says, I'm both a man and a woman, neither a man nor a woman, and sometimes both at the same time. I believe I'm enlightened. I identify as female, but I'm more a bi-gender person. This allows my brain to float between multiple worlds. Sometimes I'm a man and a woman at the same time, or I can change back just as fast. So this was something I encountered when reading his works frequently, that there's a sort of religious element to it, almost a mysticism, where he talks about his dreams a lot. So for this next part, I will be showing you some notable excerpts from his memoir, More Than Just a Flag. So it begins with his childhood, and in this passage, he describes stealing his mother's underwear while his parents are out, beginning from the age of 12. And this he refers to as the girl in the shadows. So he refers to himself in the third person as a girl. And here he describes how this became a ritual for him. Whenever I found myself alone at home and nothing else occupied my time, I would head for my mother's dresser. This is a frequent pattern that has been seen in male fetishists, particularly if you look at stories from trans widows. They're partners will often talk about stealing their wives' underwear for sexual purposes. By the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning that some of the content I'll be discussing is a little bit sensitive, including things that might be traumatizing for survivors of child sexual abuse. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so another excerpt from his memoirs. He goes into great length talking about women in this book. I haven't pulled all of the passages that I found to be interesting because there were quite a lot of passages that had to do with his dating and a certain animosity he had towards women, especially when he was in his younger adulthood, where he had some anger about not being able to lose his virginity. Anyway, so that's why I highlighted this passage here, because now we're getting to the part where he's turning his cross-dressing into a more full-time identity. And he says that since I had already had a few sexual experiences with women, I no longer obsessed about losing my virginity. Instead, I began to revisit those childhood feelings. So here he is at a laundromat at his apartment complex, and he steals a woman's underwear, takes it home with him, and uses it for sexual purposes. He says, I enjoyed wearing it. Was I a pervert? I didn't know. All I knew was that this felt exciting. It felt liberating, and I wanted more. This time, however, I would be sure to buy the clothes I wanted rather than stealing them. So then at this point, he makes the decision to go all in and begins to buy women's clothing. He talks about his shopping spree, how he stands in front of a mirror in women's clothing, and then says, the feelings I had dressed as a woman ran the gamut of human emotions. Sexual excitement topped the list of what came over me while wearing women's clothes. This passage refers to a time when he's begun going to drag bars now. And in this particular passage, he's talking about an experience he had with one of the drag performers. He went home with the drag performer, and they dressed up together and engaged in sexual acts together. It was around this time period that Helms began dating the woman he would go on to marry, named Donna, and she strongly disapproved of his fetish. 6 months into the marriage, I found out just how Donna really felt about my cross-dressing. She came home one day and found me wearing a dress. She went ballistic. She was very upset and told me in no uncertain terms that I would never dress like that at home ever again. Throughout the course of their marriage, Helms continued to pursue his sexual fetish against his wife's wishes, spending family finances on clothing, makeup, and hormones. He also invested in attending get-togethers or holiday and femme with other male cross-dressers, where lessons were provided on how to talk and walk like a woman. At this point, I would like to introduce you to what's called the Tri-S Society. So I'm going to go off a little bit on this tangent about the Tri-S Society. So this was a group of male cross-dressers that began organizing across the US during the 70s through the 90s. And Tri-S means 3 S's. So the Society for the Second Self. They referred to themselves as sororities without women and named their local chapters as though they were college sororities. They also would refer to themselves as college girls or pretend to be college girls. So Helms himself started a local chapter in Arizona after hearing about the organization on television. So I became really interested in this, and I looked into some digital archives for more information about Tri-S, which also goes by Tri Sigma, keeping with the college name theme. And these are easy to find when you know where to look for them. These are some scans of pamphlets that they would put out. I'm showing you these 2 in particular because the one on the left has this cartoon. I don't know if you can see, but at the bottom it says, Agatha ironed the paisley print shirt waister with the ruffle. I'm getting dressed up tonight. So it's the wife doing all of the housework while the husband is relaxing in the bathtub, telling her to get his clothing ready for him to dress up. There are lots of comics like this in the newsletters, by the way, poking fun at women and pointing out the fact that they're still doing the housework while the men are dressing up. And then here's another cover. Femme Mirror is the name of one of the publications, and Reflecting the Feminine. These were press releases that were published within the newsletter, talking about their organization. Group helps transvestites to find peace of mind, a sorority without women. And it describes how the Society for the Second Self exists in particular to help the heterosexual male transvestite. So they were exclusionary and they would not allow homosexual men into the organization. They were very concerned with keeping up appearances of not actually being sexual and trying to keep that hidden. So that's one reason why they wouldn't allow homosexual men into the group. Another reason is because they were specifically targeting housewives to accept the male fetish, and they would try to bring the women in to the organization, which I will show you more later. But specifically, I'm showing this clip because we have a quote here from Virginia Prince, who is the co-founder of the Tri Sigma, the Society for the Second Self, a sorority dedicated to making femininity accessible to all people. They treated this as a kind of finishing school. They would refer to it as a way to train to become feminine. Here's a photo of Virginia Prince. Virginia, whose real name is Arnold Prince. It says founder here, should say co-founder, that's my mistake. So co-founder of Tri-Sig, was also an advisor to Harry Benjamin for his 1966 book, The Transsexual Phenomenon. This is a quote from a publication by Prince. He published magazines called Transvestia, and I'm highlighting two quotes of his for the particular focus here on taking the organizing strategies of the gay and lesbian community, referred to as the gay and lesbian community, is on the march and on the way to gaining acceptance. Some of the more narrow-minded of our sister TVs, which is transvestites, see nothing good in anything that homosexuals do, but we ought to remember that their persecution is our persecution and their victory will be our victory too. So personally, I am all for their success and would cooperate in helping them to achieve it where I could, out of pure self-interest for our group, if nothing else fails. So this is a cover of Transvestia Prince's publication, and he would frequently attend these organizations for the securing of gay and lesbian rights in the US during the 60s in order to observe their tactics. I think it is in order that we keep an observer status in this field and stand by to aid their cause when it will aid ours, and to extract from their experiences and their contacts with authorities and influential groups any contacts and opportunities that may be to our advantage. Okay, so as for Prince, there's a lot of information about him. He was extremely influential. I went on a bit of a tangent there about him just because to highlight the fact that he was heavily involved in Tri Sigma as well as the creator of the trans flag. Here are a few clips from the newsletter from Tri Sigma or Tri-S. Here we have a man holding a sign crossed out from gender dysphoria to say gender euphoria, which these days online has become something of a euphemism for sexual fetishes or arousal. Here we have a photo of male cross-dressers lined up, joking about being strip searched as though they were prisoners in jail. This particular caption, you can see that it's wishing sexual assault on their critics. So as I was reading their newsletters, I would frequently find animosity towards women who didn't accept their fetish. Men would write in letters, for example, about things that they would want to do to their wives if they didn't accept what they were doing. So this caption basically describes one of her critics had blown all 4 tires of her car when she was driving in a downtown area of New York City, and she was only wearing a bra and panties at the time. It's a bit disturbing. I'm sorry about that. And then here another caption where they're comparing themselves to prostituted women. I have talked in the past about something called Sissy Captions, which are the modern equivalent of this. So I'm pointing this out of interest for the fact that this is an ongoing trend that goes back decades, actually. I had kind of thought this was a new phenomenon. But when I say Sissy Captions, I mean something quite like this, like a photo. These days, usually it's the photo of women, not cross-dressing men, and some sexualized content with it. And a few more clips from their publications, which I'm highlighting here to show the involvement of children. So here you have the father figure dressed up making his son dress up in women's clothing. They've actually done it to a real child here, I believe. No way to know for certain, of course, because sometimes it might actually be a real girl that they've used. But anyway. And then some of the comics. Now go to sleep, and tomorrow Daddy will tell you about his trip and fam to New York. And then another comic making fun of the housewife. How come you take off your dress whenever there's work to be done? Okay, so here it's a focus on the child, which was a disturbing aspect of this, which I'm going to explain in more detail coming up. But here you can see they would write poetry. Often the poetry might be about doing makeup or shopping or something very stereotypical like this. Sometimes it might be criticizing women who don't do such things and putting them down. But then you get sometimes these strange references to children, be a little girl again, and talking about a young girl enjoying her femininity. Okay, so here's a letter from one of the members, ostensibly. So joining Tri-S and the chapter has been about the best thing I've done for myself. I'm so pleased to receive the copies of our special Joy, the newsletter. You gals really did a number on my wife at my first meeting. She was skeptical when she agreed to go, but we had a wonderful evening. It's important to remember that in the US, women were not capable of financial independence until the 60s. And it wasn't until there was an Equality Credit Act in 1974 that discrimination from banks against women was made a legal reality. So when we're talking about women being coerced into going along with this with their husbands, it's important to remember that they might often have been forced to do so financially. And then again, here we have another comic making fun of the wife who is clearly not feminine enough, doing all of the laundry for the husband. And then this clip over here, which I had highlighted to show the fact that this is the heterosexual cross-dressing support. They were very adamant, like I said, about excluding homosexual men. This led me down to another path of looking at these, the porn magazines that were being published at around this same time. Again, from the 60s to the 80s. So this is from 1988. This is called the Sissy Times. It gives instructions about what these men should be doing in order to present as women. I've put, pay attention to this. I will be mentioning this later, but cross-dressing, petticoat punishment, corset discipline, male submission, humiliation, female superiority, and dominance. So these are all factors of BDSM. Petticoat punishment refers to the forced dressing in lingerie, for example. And here we have a quote saying that they ought to mimic the female menstrual cycle and being given lessons on how to do so. Often with this sissy porn culture, it revolves around being given tasks and assignments and things to do. And then, of course, you know, things like cleaning the house that they might be asked to do, which they would intentionally do poorly in order to be punished. But there's other things within as well, like keep a diary of your feminine thoughts, read women's magazines and books, cultivate a feminine hobby, all of these kinds of things that they're being asked to do. But it goes back even before the 80s. So this is circa 1962, the Female Mimics International magazine. In the back of these cross-dressing magazines, you might have advertisements for estrogen, female hormones, as well as I've highlighted here for books on fetishism, particularly sadomasochism. Here's a few more just examples of that. The BDSM pornography books that were advertised in the back of cross-dresser magazines. You'll notice here again the theme about jail, girls' punishment at school of discipline, male captives forced into female attire. All of this is very relevant to the fact that, as I pointed out before, there was a jail theme about being, well, ostensibly it's the threat of being raped while in jail. So the element of sexual violence being thrilling, quite obvious here. Another cross-dresser magazine from that time period, the Journal of Male Feminism. So I was thinking about this, and I actually started to wonder if this wasn't some kind of backlash to the sexual liberation movement of Europe and the Americas in the 1960s, because this all seems to have started just after that through the 60s up into the 80s. And even the element of something such as male feminism, it seems to me that history is repeating itself. So within these cross-dresser publications, what they were doing is saying that they were being proper feminists by encouraging femininity, which is something that we see repeating today in the gender ideology. Those who write on this topic, for example, Julia Serrano, will talk about the scapegoating of femininity as though femininity is being wrongfully portrayed as a problem for women, and that we just need to embrace it and empower ourselves with it. So I just thought that was interesting because it seems like a backlash to the women's movement and then repeating itself again today. I was pointing that out for the purpose of giving you some more context about Monica Helms, because he was involved with these cross-dressing organizations. So I do want to return now back to the main topic about Monica Helms. So he had written in his book that he had told his wife about his cross-dressing before he proposed, but then also admits that she denied this. Anyway, it led to a breakdown in their marriage. And ultimately, it was him, not his wife, who decided to end the marriage. And he did so because she was just uncomfortable with his fetish. He says that she made hateful comments about his breast growth. So after their divorce was finalized in 1999, he began frequenting Arizona's sex clubs, which afforded patrons the chance to watch people have sex in windowed rooms. Helms tells of how these clubs enabled me to fulfill each and every fantasy I had concerning sex with men. This included orgies, hot tubs, you name it. I spent several months visiting these clubs. During that time, I had oral and anal sex with men on multiple occasions. I wanted to have sex with women too, but the opportunity never presented itself, he says. And then he says that Stanley Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut seemed tame compared to what he was doing in these sex clubs. Then he says that after he got that out of his system, he began to identify as a lesbian woman. He began attending lesbian clubs 3 to 4 times a week from 1999 to 2000. And he also authored short stories with sexual themes, including forced feminization, wherein men are transformed into women as a humiliating punishment. In this next excerpts I'm going to show you are from his science fiction book, Tales from a Two-Gendered Mind. So he has this story called Sexual Harassment, where a man begins cross-dressing with his wife's clothing. The wife is killed tragically in a car accident. I've put here, this is a common theme. It's very common in forced feminization erotica for the wife to be killed off, and then, surprise, the husband turns into the wife and takes over her identity. So here, this is an excerpt from where he's using her clothing for his fetish. Then he starts to feel as though he's being taken over and he has no control over himself. In this story, actually, it's the ghost of the wife doing it to him, because it's always a woman's fault, right? And then he goes on to go to gay clubs and have sex with men, pretending to be his wife, even using his wife's name. In another story, it features two lesbians who arrive at a gas station. This is a body snatching story where the women begin to age rapidly, and the two older, then two women at the gas station become younger. So they swap bodies. It goes on to describe in sexual terms the body swapping, and then at the very end of the story, there's a veiled threat to his wife, Donna, as one of the characters that this is going to happen to next shows up. So then he has this other story about a child that never ages. It's called A Woman Scorned, and it features a man in Arizona. As he is from Arizona, it's clearly meant to be him. A child comes and knocks on his door and basically is stalking him and says that she has to marry him. He mistakes her for a 16-year-old girl. She then tells him, "No, I'm a witch. I just never age." Which, by the way, this is also kind of a common theme in some anime that features children as well. And then it ends with this really kind of creepy, they have a daughter that looks like him and then has that same power. So here we have the fantasy of the man being turned into a little girl as part of the age regression. So Helms was 48 when he designed the trans flag in 1999. He has claimed that the stripes came to him by way of divine intervention, but the color scheme is often seen repeated in other contexts. According to researcher Dr. Sarah Good, pedophiles who organize online have developed their own culture, language, and symbols. One common symbol used is the baby blue, pink, and white stripes. And here I've taken this from her lecture, which you can find on YouTube. These logos, which I have double-checked for myself just to be certain I'm not propagating any kind of conspiracy theory, they are on pedophile forums. I've seen it myself. This is not on the dark web. You can find this in a couple of clicks. And these logos go back to as early as 1997, predating the flag. Areas in Europe that have advertised child sex trafficking and been busted by organizations have used these color codes to advertise as well. And it's not clear whether Helms was aware of this correlation at the time. I'm not saying for sure that this was on purpose. However, it seems a bit coincidental to me, and he's often repeated that the colors were meant to represent baby boys and baby girls. And here we can see it flying at a preschool in the US. And then here we see the color scheme repeated on a pro-pedophile forum. I just want to show you a couple examples of these age regression erotica that are available on Amazon. Again, just a couple of searches. You can find these on Amazon for sale. Transgender forced feminization involving children. They often use these pseudonyms as well. Mary Martin, for those who don't know, refers to an actor who played Peter Pan. Dr. Christina Richards has called for the normalization of age play, furry fetishes, and sadomasochistic practices as further sexualities. Richards serves on the European Professional Association for Transgender Health and on WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. He has presented a lecture talking about how age play should be normalized. This is a quote from a writing of Richards that has to do with age regression. Terms which may be encountered here include daddy's little girl, in which an older male treats a younger female bottom as a child. The term sissification intersects with age play, as it is where an adult male is consensually forced to don the clothes of and behave as a young girl as part of a BDSM scene. So I'm highlighting this to really kind of hammer home that I'm not quite convinced that this is a total coincidence about Monica Helms, the trans flag, the age regression. I'm very skeptical. And also, I just wanted to announce that I do have an investigation coming up soon that I've been working very hard on, where I have found that WPATH has been collaborating for over 10 years with a fetish website. Content featured on the website includes child pornography, also called child sexual abuse materials, of an extreme sadomasochistic nature, very including torture, bestiality, snuff, just awful. So here's an example of a screenshot from the written pornography. By the way, it's all written. That's how they get around the law. Written pornography of this nature is legal in the US. So there's over 3,000 stories on this website that particularly focus on children and especially on the castrating of children. And then here's a screenshot from one of those stories that's rated G, or the lightest one, which talks about lowering the age of consent to 12. So every time I see something like puberty blockers for children, it's all I can think about now, these types of age regression fetishes and the content that I've seen in the written format. It disturbs me very greatly. And once you know where to look for these things, you can pretty much find them easily. This one was on Twitter, where this man was excited about children being put on hormones and had posted it along with child sexual abuse materials. And then I just wanted to link this back to John Money, who had been published in a pedophile journal, basically apologizing for pedophilia, saying that it's not pathological in any way. This is part of an article that was published in the Histories of Sexology by a current pro-pedophile activist who is a gender studies professor at the University of Amsterdam. His name is Gert Hekma. I wrote about him on my Substack. And he here describes how the movement during the 70s and 80s to normalize certain male fetishes all were successful except for the pedophile movement, which he goes on to say was a result of a growing feminist concern. So this was in the Netherlands, but this follows the same pattern that happened in Germany as well, where during the 70s and 80s, they tried to lower the age of consent. And it was women who pushed back against this, but have largely been forgotten. They were slandered terribly at that time for doing so. According to Alice Schwarzer, who says that they went through all kinds of abuse for pushing back against this. This is from an article she wrote in 2010. She is the founder of the German publication Emma, a very well-known German feminist. She says, from today's perspective, it seems hard to believe that Emma was the only voice back then who opposed it with force. So they managed to prevent the decriminalization of pedophilia, essentially lowering the age of consent to 12. And I wanted to kind of wrap this up with her comment, because I believe it is incumbent on us now to know that that is coming. That is what is being pushed. That is what will be pushed if it's not already where you are, and that we need to be ready for it. And we are going to be slandered horribly for it, as we already are, but that we need to be aware of the history of this. I, looking into this now, believe more than ever that history is repeating itself, and that the next thing coming will be to lower the age of consent. Everything I've seen and I believe talked about just now points to that, in my opinion. I have been speculating if pornography is a kind of causing a social contagion, perhaps increasing fetishism. It appears to be the case from my experience looking at anecdotal evidence online. I am not familiar with any kind of research into that, that has happened recently, but it would not surprise me given that we have seen social contagions on TikTok, for example, the whole gender movement itself being a kind of a social contagion. But I do wonder to what extent we're actually seeing an uptick in this behavior because of streaming pornography and what it is that we can do to fight it. Now, I don't have an answer to that. My only strategy has been to promote awareness because I think that not enough people are aware that this is going on. And certainly we have the problem that these behaviors are being presented to us as though they are innate, which is false in my view. Contestable, I know, but I think so. So I think that that would be the next thing to consider going forward as well, in addition to watching out for the lowering of age of consent, which I think will be introduced as a way of introducing gender affirming care under that guise. So that's what I wanted to say.